In less than 48 hours, a major crisis hit American dairy farmers. Over 200 containers of American cheese, worth nearly $3 billion, were completely rejected by Canada and sent back to the United States. These containers were treated like piles of unwanted garbage. Canada activated a massive 300% tariff that made every ton of U.S. cheese worthless in their market. The cheese became uncompetitive, unsellable, and unable to cross the border. Suddenly, hundreds of tons of cheese that were once meant for foreign supermarket shelves came flooding back into the U.S. domestic market. These products were slapped with discount labels and sold at cheap prices. However, the truth is that much of this cheese was old stock, near its expiration date, and had already been rejected by international markets. On Wisconsin farms, desperate farmers began dumping milk down drains because they couldn't find buyers. At major retailers like Walmart and Target, a full-scale price war started. Meanwhile, the White House remained completely silent about the situation. This wasn't just a simple tariff retaliation. It was a serious blow to American agriculture, where U.S. consumers unknowingly became the final dumping ground for products that the rest of the world didn't want. This crisis was only the beginning of much bigger problems. Canada's attack on U.S. dairy wasn't just about tariffs. It was a calculated campaign that left the entire U.S. dairy supply chain struggling. Since the 1960s, Canada has controlled its dairy sector through a supply management system. This system controls domestic production, imports, and prices through quotas and tariffs. Under the USMCA trade deal, the U.S. was only allowed to export up to 3.6% of Canada's dairy market without facing heavy penalties. But once that limit was exceeded, Canada didn't hesitate to activate penalty tariffs, placing a 300% tax on cheese, butter, and milk that didn't comply with their rules. The drama exploded in July 2025 when the U.S. increased cheese exports beyond its allowed quota. Canada responded immediately with the extremely high 300% duty while also cutting back on import allowances. They stayed true to their strict protectionist stance. As a result, hundreds of containers filled with cheese, butter, and milk were stopped at the border, denied entry, and forced to return to the U.S. What made this situation worse was that most of these containers carried aging inventory and near-expired goods. Some of these products had already been rejected by other foreign markets. U.S. Customs confirmed that many of these shipments were turned away without clear explanations. This included Italian-style and specialty American cheeses that were originally made for export but were now being treated as commercial waste. According to a report from the International Dairy Foods Association, above-quota tariffs can reach nearly 300%, turning each container into a loss worth tens of millions of dollars. In Wisconsin, California, and across countless small farms, the impact was devastating. Many farmers who couldn't find buyers had no choice but to dump milk into drains. This created a haunting image of an industry in serious trouble. Wisconsin, which was once home to nearly 7,000 dairy farms in 2020, has seen hundreds of farms shut down as market prices collapsed. When the domestic supply chain suffered this double shock of massive surpluses and falling prices, the crisis became much deeper. Cheese flooded the U.S. market at steep discounts, but in reality, it was just rebranded waste. American consumers might think they're getting a good deal, but they're actually bearing the cost of a brutal trade war. They're consuming goods that Canada had already written off as unwanted. The strange silence from the White House raised an uncomfortable question. Was this the result of reckless policy decisions and retaliation strategies against Canada and Mexico? Canada didn't just fight back with a 300% tariff. They also cut import quotas, damaging the very foundation of America's dairy network. This was no longer just a price war. It became a war that affected national confidence, where American citizens were left paying the price multiple times over. From the perspective of everyday American consumers, particularly those aged 21 to 50 for shopping in supermarket aisles. The sudden wave of cheap cheese might seem like a good deal, but behind those eye-catching discounts lies the silent aftermath of a trade war gone wrong. Over the past few weeks, major grocery chains like Walmart, Target, and Kroger have been flooded with cheese labeled as shock sales. However, few shoppers realize that most of this cheese is leftover inventory that was previously rejected at the Canadian border. These products are near their expiration dates. In some cases, they've even been deep frozen to extend their shelf life. There are no warning labels on these products. No regulations require retailers to tell customers that this is actually international waste now being sold domestically. The price cuts are purely temporary. Those flashing discount codes that shoppers see are the result of a supply chain collapse. Goods are being liquidated to clear containers, not to meet genuine consumer demand. Buyers may feel they're getting a bargain, but in reality, they've become the final victims of a brutal trade conflict where quality and origin not properly checked. Meanwhile, in Canada, dairy products like milk and cheese are governed by a tightly regulated supply management system that dates back to the 1960s. Programs like Pro-Action enforce strict quality control, completely banning growth hormones and antibiotics in milk. Canadian producers are required to test for antibiotic residues in every batch before processing, building strong trust between farmers and consumers. The stark contrast highlights a troubling truth. The cheese flooding U.S. supermarkets may not meet international quality standards, at least not by Canadian standards, where every drop of milk is thoroughly screened before export. Provinces like Quebec and Ontario have implemented farm-level tracking systems, ensuring that each shipment is hormone-free, antibiotic-free, and ethically produced without forced overproduction. When you walk into a store and see U.S. cheese on super clearance, remember this: it's not a health win. It's the downstream wreckage of a reverse supply chain where American consumers have unknowingly become the dumping ground for goods the rest of the world rejected, while Canada proudly protects the integrity of its dairy by banning growth hormones outright. Americans are being handed unchecked products with no disclosure and no warnings. This isn't just a shock in price. It's a jolt to the safety and transparency of the national food chain. American families spotting shock sale cheese in supermarkets might think it's good news. But behind those markdowns lies a supply chain shock and a deeper breakdown in public trust. Corporations like Land O'Lakes and Kraft are now dealing with exploding costs, cold storage facilities overflowing with inventory, warehouse fees skyrocketing, and shipping costs climbing every day. They're being forced to sell off surplus cheese, milk, and butter, but they're keeping the true scale of the damage secret, fearing damage to their brand reputation. Things became even worse when the National Milk Producers Federation issued a stark warning. As of mid-2025, the U.S. dairy industry had suffered $7 billion in losses caused by retaliatory tariffs from Canada and Mexico, combined with severe cost increases across the supply chain. That figure isn't just alarming. It raises a much bigger question: is American agriculture now spiraling out of control? Under immense pressure, industry boards sent emergency letters to the White House begging for urgent help. But so far, no concrete relief plan has emerged, only vague promises from the sidelines and deafening silence from the administration. Several experts warned that without large-scale financial help or complete restructuring, the U.S. dairy industry could collapse within 6 to 12 months. Some states, like Wisconsin, once called America's cheese capital, have proposed buying up surplus cheese and giving it away for free to residents. But these patchwork solutions are fragmented, inconsistent, and clearly not enough to rescue the entire industry. Canada's blow wasn't just a 300% tariff and a quota cut. It was a strike at the heart of trust. Farmers lost hope as milk went down the drain. Consumers began questioning the very products on their shelves. Are these goods safe? Are we eating near expired stock? The line separating producers, government, and citizens is now clouded with doubt. Unless Washington steps in with real financial support, a restructured supply chain, and strict transparency about product origins, the dairy crisis won't just be a financial loss, it will be a collapse in national confidence. While Canada enforces tough standards, checking for hormones, antibiotics, and product quality at every level, the U.S. is now pushing cut-rate cheese into a confused, poorly regulated market. This isn't just an economic failure, it's a system-wide failure, one where everyday Americans are paying the price for a trade war they never signed up for. When Canada boldly imposed a 300% tariff to protect its domestic farmers, Washington offered no meaningful response, no real negotiations, no emergency aid package, not even a word of reassurance to the public. There's been zero indication that the White House fully understands the seriousness of a crisis now spreading from farmland to dinner tables. The fallout extends beyond just Canada. The European Union, Japan, and Australia are now all reviewing their dairy import policies on U.S. goods. According to a report from the European Commission, the EU has placed over $72 billion worth of American exports, including cheese, on a potential retaliatory tariff list if Washington fails to adjust its dumping practices. It's a clear signal that the U.S. now faces a fresh wave of trade isolation, not just from rivals, but from its longest-standing allies. Back home, American consumers believe they're getting a deal. But in truth, they're eating products the global market has already rejected. Near-expired cheese, returned inventory, possibly not even meeting international safety standards. There are no warning labels, no origin transparency, no system to protect consumers from the consequences of an out-of-control tariff war. America's national food system, once a pillar of stability, is breaking down layer by layer. Farmers are losing massive amounts of money. Corporations are confused and struggling. Supermarkets are absorbing financial losses, and ordinary people have become the final dumping ground for goods no other country will accept. What's more alarming than the economic damage is the erosion of public trust in the supply chain, in government leadership, and in the quality of what ends up on their plates. At this point, the issue is no longer about a single tariff. It's a comprehensive test of Washington's crisis management abilities. Will the administration step in to save the dairy industry, a long-standing symbol of American agriculture, or let it collapse in silence to save political face? Will policymakers have the courage to admit their mistakes, correct course, and rebuild a sustainable supply chain? The cheese story has grown beyond any debate over pricing or trade concessions. It's become a symbol of something far greater: the right to safe food, the sovereignty of national food policy, and most importantly, the public's faith in governance. If Washington fails to act in time, what began with just a few rejected containers of cheese may go down as the costliest turning point in American agriculture this decade. Farm by farm, family by family, people across the country are watching tariff developments day by day because their future depends on it.